All right. Hello, this is Wmpyr, here to talk about something called Carenza. I was just watching a YouTube video of a Jeet Kune Do instructor, and that instructor was doing Carenza. And okay, so first let me explain what is Carenza. Well, it's basically shadowboxing in Filipino martial arts. I think that's a good way to look at it. You're by yourself and you could be using weapons, various weapons, or empty hand even, and you're just free flowing by yourself in an empty space. That is carenza, from my understanding. Okay, um, and so I saw this Jeet Kune Do instructor doing that. Obviously, he's been trained in Filipino martial arts, and I noticed something, right? Is that what he was doing was two types of carenza, right? Two types. One was pretty much your traditional Filipino martial arts type of free flow. Okay, so he was using a knife and he was slashing and stabbing, and he was being smooth and he was flowing. It's pretty much what you'd see in any Filipino martial arts studio. Um, any Filipino martial arts practitioners would be doing this kind of similar type of movement. And then he switched. He switched and he did a different kind of carenza, which was now, it looked a lot more like boxing but with a knife. So he was literally knife boxing almost. Um, the way that he moved his body, the way his footwork was, um, even the way that he slashed and attacked and stabbed, it was different. So he said that this was based off of his actual sparring. And I know what he's talking about because I've seen it and I've done it too. So basically he was dividing it into your traditional Filipino martial arts carenza and then actual sparring carenza. So two types, all right. Um, and yeah, if you go to a Filipino martial arts school, maybe you only see uh, the traditional carenza type of movement. Even though they might spar, they may not practice that kind of carenza. It just depends on the school, the individual. And when I think about myself back in the day, I did the exact same thing where I did the two different types of carenza. One was the traditional, and the other was more this like the sparring type of movement. And for me, I called it knife boxing. You could still do it with a stick, but I called it knife boxing. So it was traditional Filipino knife work, and then there was knife boxing. That's the way that I did it. So this was around 2006, and I taught it this way on my YouTube videos and also the textbook that I wrote, the K4S system at the time. I taught it two separate programs like that, and I specifically said do both. And the question is, why is there two, right? Which one do I use? You know, when do I use which one when, right? When do I use the traditional? When do I use the sparring one, right? So in my case, it was the knife boxing and the traditional. And my answer to that, to figure out why is there two, and the way that I explained it was the traditional was my plan A. Okay, that's my main. That's what I want to do. So in a real life situation, I want to do that. What my traditional movements. However, the reality is things don't always go as planned. I could be caught off guard. I could just be having a bad day, an off day. I could be sick. any number of reasons, then my plan B is the knife boxing. So that's the way that I taught it. I was like, use plan B as your backup. It's your backup plan. So knife boxing was there when things are going terribly, terribly wrong. Use knife boxing, right? So that's the way that I explained it back in the day. And since then, that was 2006. Since then, I've changed. I've changed. And now I only have one. I don't have two anymore. I only have one. Okay. And the reason being, how did I just end up with one? The, the way that it became one was because the traditional, if you look at it historically, there's a great influence in Filipino martial arts from espada y daga, which is basically fencing. Okay, so that's fencing. It's a European fencing, and it is my belief. This is something that I cannot prove, and I really haven't done enough research. But this is just my own logical guess. Critical thinking is that fencing unarmed is boxing. Not today's sport boxing, because that's become its own thing. But if you look back in the past and if you think about ancient boxing, then to me it was nothing more than fencing without weapons. Is barehanded fencing is boxing. Okay. So that's just my own guess, and now, at least for me, it makes sense to where I have one system. I don't have two now. I don't have to juggle two and figure out when to use what. No, it's just one. When we think about ancient weapons fighting, your main tools are your hands. Why? Because it's what you have in your hand. Whether it's a rock, a stick, or a medieval mace, a medieval flail, or a longsword, whatever the case, it's what's in your hands, right? So that's why without the weapons, is still your hands are your main weapons. Therefore, is boxing. Now, the kicking and the grappling, all of that comes into play. Of course, it comes into play even with weapons, but it's not the main thing. Those are secondary. So the main thing is using your weapon, which is held by the hand. So that's why I say boxing and ancient boxing is really what I'm talking about, is where the hand is the main thing. That doesn't mean I'm not going to kick, because I will kick, I will headbutt, I will grapple, but those aren't the main things. So once I understand that, and I make that connection with fencing and boxing, then it's really one system that we're talking about. And that has always been the case for me, is that I was taught one system in Filipino martial arts. Is the one system that you learn with the sticks can be applied to the knife, the machete, a tomahawk, improvised weapons, the karambit, empty hand, whatever. You're still doing one system. So that's the way it was taught to me. And now, even more so, I'm staying true to that, in my opinion. So, yeah, when I think of it that way, then there was like no reason for me to separate the two and have the traditional Filipino martial arts and then have the other one, which is the sparring. No, to me it was like, no, it should just be one. And I finally was able to do that. And therefore, when you are doing Carenza, in my opinion, it should look a lot more like that, where it combines the two rather than separate them. This is just my opinion. And when you go, well, then doesn't that make the knife boxing completely dominate? And the answer is no. And that is a good question, actually, but it's no. is going to be a mixture of the two. And it's like, well, how do you mix the two? Like I said, it comes from fencing. So then, even in boxing, we have ranges. So there is something called the outboxing, where you're boxing in long range. And then there's inside boxing, something like a Mike Tyson. And then there's clinch work, which is now it's going to have the grappling, which is not really allowed in boxing, but we could see a little bit of that still to this day, right? So those are the main three. And those main three right there is what Bruce Lee had defined in his Jeet Kune Do before he did the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, if I'm not mistaken. Um, he didn't may not have used that terminology the way that I said outboxing, inboxing, and clinch, but it's really long range, medium range, and close range is what I'm talking about, and that's what I use. So it makes sense to me. It works with me, um, and therefore your carenza should reflect that. So when you are doing the outboxing, so to speak, it should look more like fencing. And then when you go into um, medium range, now it should definitely be what I would call more like a Mike Tyson style, where it's power based. And then of course we have clinch, which is close range. So for that, I think it'd be good to practice a couple of grappling moves with the stick. I highly recommend that. So anyway, that's the way that I do it. So really, all three of those, please don't get confused with that. I still, in this video, I'm putting that in the category of knife boxing. In the actual method that I teach in B1 Escrima, I divide those up into knife fencing, knife boxing, and knife wrestling or knife grappling. And I really don't want to confuse you guys. So let me just call all of that knife fighting. Okay. So I severely apologize if it sounds confusing, but it's really just fighting skills at this point. And that's what my Carenza work is now consist of. Is when I do Carenza, it's just that knife fighting or stick fighting or empty hand fighting. And that's what I'm doing. And that's it. And within there's the different distances, the different styles of fighting that's included within that. But so it's just now just one thing that I'm doing rather than, here is the traditional carenza, and then now here is the carenza when I do for sparring. No, I don't do that. And um, and like I said, there at 2006 I divided it into the traditional work and then the knife boxing. And now the traditional and the knife boxing have blended in together, and I don't have to worry about that. It's just one thing now. So I hope that makes sense. That's it for now. Thank you for viewing, and take care, folks.